what we have found by engaging students, graduate and undergraduate, in this research is they find career opportunities that they would have never considered before because they see what the science and what goes into actually formulating a pet diet or a pet treat. And it really has opened up an entire field for students that may have never thought of this as a career opportunity before.
Welcome to the Pet Food Science Podcast, powered by Wisenetics, your trusted source for the cutting-edge science and insights driving the global pet food industry forward. Whether you're a nutritionist, product developer, marketer, veterinarian, or decision maker in the pet food space, this podcast is your go-to for staying competitive and informed. From emerging research and regulatory shifts to ingredient innovation and sustainability trends, we cover what matters. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Shoveler, and I'm a professor of companion animal nutrition at the University of Guelph. I have a background in comparative animal nutrition and 2 decades of experience working alongside industry professionals. But let's dive into today's episode and talk about research funding and student engagement. Today, we have Professor Jennifer Martin from Colorado State and also the director of the Pet Food Alliance to join us for this thrilling conversation, at least thrilling for me. Jennifer, would you mind introducing yourself and the Pet Food Alliance to the listeners?
Yeah, happy to. And thanks so much for the opportunity to share a bit about myself, research, student engagement, and the Pet Food Alliance. I am a meat scientist by training. So I pursued degrees in animal science at Texas Tech University. Originally from Texas, really thought I wanted to be a veterinarian. As most young people in the animal science space feel like they want to go. And over the course of my undergraduate career, developed an interest and a passion for the meat industry and the role in which animal production plays in producing food. At the time, at that stage of my career, I really wasn't aware or thought much about the fact that the meat products also fed our pets. I was really thinking about it from a human perspective. And so as a meat scientist, I took on a position at Colorado State University in 2015, focused on the quality and safety of meats, primarily for human consumption. And throughout the course of my career, early in my career, I'd heard of colleagues and friends who were doing research with the pet industry. I had several graduate student colleagues who ended up in careers in the meat and the pet food industry, but really hadn't begun to acknowledge this interwoven relationship that the not only animal science field and the nutrition, genetics, all of those parts that play a role certainly in the pet space, but the nutrition and the food production. So how we produce food for humans is not too dissimilar for how we produce food for pets, especially when it's from a meat origin. And when I began to dive into that and started to get questions in 2016, 2017 from pet food manufacturers around some of the quality and safety issues they were having with products that were intended for pet consumption versus human consumption, we realized so many of the parallels and many of the quality and safety issues we were dealing with and wrestling with on a research side for human foods were similar and perhaps a bit farther behind on the pet food space. And as I started to explore how could we fund some of the research in those spaces, there were only a handful of funding entities in the U.S. that were actually funding through grant solicitation research in the pet food space. And so we, in 2017, submitted a proposal to one of those agencies called the Fats and Protein Research Foundation to establish the Pet Food Alliance. And the sole purpose of the Pet Food Alliance is to enable and empower research in the pet food space, and specifically the intersection of the ingredients that go into pet food manufacturing, be those whole meat products or rendered products, and then the pet food producers. Oftentimes what we observed is there is a recognition that there's a mutual need for research or solutions that impact both of those industries and are informed by both of those industries. There was not funding for it. And there also wasn't always an open dialogue between those who are producing the ingredients and those who are manufacturing the food of how we can together work to mobilize solutions. Instead, what we found there was a lot of finger pointing of the problems that were being observed on the pet food manufacturing were the blame of the suppliers of the raw materials or vice versa. And so we established the Pet Food Alliance in partnership and in funding support with Fats and Protein Research Foundation in 2017. And the purpose is, again, to mobilize and empower research that's informed by industry needs and brings together industry members to collaboratively identify opportunities for research and then lean into the research community, be that academicians or other research parties who have skill sets, knowledge that is valuable to the industry, but perhaps they wouldn't otherwise be connected. So we really serve as I tell my students a lot, it's a matchmaker of sorts, of bringing folks together with a common purpose of we're trying to provide healthy food for our pets. And the best way to do that well and efficiently and sustainably and safely is to work together to address our challenges. And that's the whole purpose of the Pet Food Alliance. We've next year will be our 10th year of operation. We have around 250 companies that are members of the Alliance. They span big and small, domestic and international companies. And they really do come together with the idea of a rising tide lifts all boats. And in a space where funding for research and pet food is fairly sparse, we try to mobilize research funding through companies investing in the Alliance and the Alliance then investing in research. So I'm really honored to have the opportunity to share a bit about that here today and how that ties into mobilizing solutions that are empowered by research and innovation. And then long term, the role that students can play in being a part of that.
Feed formulation software is stuck in the past. Most tools haven't evolved beyond basic least cost optimization. A Diet Forge changes that. It's an AI-powered platform with nonlinear ingredient modeling for enzymes and additives, cost per gain and maximum profit optimization, and real-time collaboration like Google Docs for nutrition. Every recommendation is grounded in world-class research, built for modern nutritionists who need more than legacy desktop software can deliver. Work seamlessly with your team and optimize the way modern operations demand. Try dietforge.ai free today. Feed formulation, finally modernized.
Yeah, so maybe that's a really great place to start, which is the opportunity for industries to be a bit more involved in the graduate programs of our students, having greater engagement. I know personally that graduate students are looking for more industry experiential learning than academia has provided in the past. As one example, to kind of encourage industry to get more involved with academic research rather than depending on the granting agencies to fuel a lot of this, which doesn't always get you the research that you need at the moment, or it can delay it. So let's talk a little bit about that student engagement. So students in industry, experiential learning.
I think I'm really fortunate because I came from a program at Texas Tech University in the meat science program that really did in the meat industry actively engage students, not only through internships, but the research they performed there was often in partnership with industry. And so as a graduate student, as an undergraduate student, I got to see firsthand the solutions, the problems we were investigating in the laboratory, to investigate those alongside our industry partners, and then to see the solutions be implemented in real time, right? And in the course of my graduate career. And so I'm really fortunate to have come from that training background. And one of the things that was impressed upon me is the experience we get, or that we give our students by involving them in a real world application of research, I think elevates and mobilizes their passion for it. And I that was my experience. There's something about you doing research as a student and knowing that the impacts of this research have value. And in some spaces, you can actually walk down the aisle at the grocery store and see the impacts of your research. And what we saw is that disconnect that students might feel from research that that doesn't have that industry connection went away. And it went away pretty simply when they could hear from the industry members firsthand. These are the problems that we're facing. They could go and visit in real time the facilities that were experiencing those problems. It's not always perfect, right? I think that's the other part that is it's a delicate balance of performing independent research that is informed by industry needs and not feeling as a graduate student that you have to deliver results that your industry partner likes. So we play that balance often of the role of a student in performing industry research isn't to do what they want you to do. It's to help empower research to have an impact in whatever way that it can. And what I have seen in my experience training graduate students and my own experience as a graduate student is that relationship, I think, elevates the thought processes that a researcher goes through. And when you're able to hear firsthand real world challenges, and I think to then understand where your research is applied, the research itself becomes more valuable. And I think in the pet food space, one of the things that really led to the origin of the Pet Food Alliance, and I think has mobilized some of the action we've taken over the past 4 or 5 years to bring the campus connection to the Alliance, is that in the pet food sector, the rendering sector, well, we know there are tons of students who may have an interest like myself in meat science, or they're interested in pets. They know very little about this industry. So the average animal science student, for example, in my experience when we were surveying students early in the Pet Food Alliance, they don't in their animal science degree necessarily take a course in pet nutrition. And if they do, usually that course in pet nutrition is around formulating a diet or understanding nutritional needs of the pet, but really not understanding how that diet and how that food or treat is actually manufactured and some of those technical nuances of the manufacturing process. And so what we observed is that for this field particularly, there was an absence, almost like a massive gap in understanding the industry enough to be able to do research that had value in the industry. And I felt that way myself as a new researcher who, I was getting questions from pet food manufacturers or meat industry partners who were selling products to pet food manufacturers. And my research, while I may have the technical ability or the scientific skill set in a laboratory setting to do a research project that should theoretically add value or help answer questions, it doesn't mean that it actually was implementable within the manufacturing process of the pet food. And so we took our students on tours of pet food manufacturing facilities and allowed them to see firsthand the research that we're doing in the lab is actually going to impact and be implemented here. And how might we change our laboratory scenarios? How might we rethink our hypotheses to do better research because we understand the industry better? And so what I think has happened as a result of this engagement with students and industry is research is better, especially in this space, because we know then that it's not research that lives in a lab and kind of stays on dusty shelves. It's informed by the real world. And I think that really started with not just a faculty member, thinking we could do something. It's taking the students to the facilities, inviting the industry to our laboratory and saying, how can we work together to develop projects that we do here that apply there? And it's really been a magical thing to watch. And I think in the pet food space, particularly, what I have found super fascinating for our students in the program, again, the majority of them, the majority of animal science students in the US want to be veterinarians. The majority of them will not be veterinarians by the time they finish their animal science degree, but they are passionate about companion animals. They are passionate about the health and well-being of their pets. What we have found by engaging students, graduate and undergraduate, in this research is they find career opportunities that they would have never considered before because they see what the science and what goes into actually formulating a pet diet or a pet treat. And it really has opened up an entire field for students that may have never thought of this as a career opportunity before.
Yeah, and I think if you add in the growth of the pet food industry in general, and then the demand for potential highly qualified personnel, it's a perfect opportunity.
Absolutely.
Most companies know AI can help, but the hard part is getting it deployed inside the business. Elevate Agents builds and launches custom AI agents that handle repetitive workflows, reduce manual overhead, and help teams move faster without adding headcount. From identifying the right use cases to deploying agents that actually work in your operations, Elevate turns AI from an idea into execution. Build smarter systems with Elevate Agents. Visit elevateagents.ai.
Would you mind commenting, because I certainly have been challenged with this, and we all have to fill out COI or conflict of interest statements for every single piece of data that we generate. Can you talk a little bit about industrial funded research versus governmental funded research, and what that means to really the academic who is choosing to take that funding from industry and then implementing it for largely research that will be driven by graduate students?
Yeah, I love the question. And it's one that I think there's probably a spectrum, right, of where it goes really well and perhaps where it doesn't go so well. And I think it comes down to first your earlier point of managing the conflict. And I think acknowledging where conflict might exist and where conflict might then have an influence on either research findings, research funding, things of that nature. So there's that core scientific principle of being self-aware enough to say, this is a conflict that we need to manage. But I think what in my experience, the conflict is easy to manage if it's acknowledged. And I think then establishing clear expectations and guardrails, if you will, around what are the objectives, the outputs, the outcomes of a research project, and where is industry involvement valued, where is industry involvement essential, and where is industry involvement kind of off limits. And where I like to think about it is when you think about, like a life cycle of a project, for example, in my opinion, the projects that I do or that we do with industry, or the projects that industry funds, is kind of at the birth, right, of where this is a real problem that we need real answers for. And if research is informed by industry input there and maybe is flourished and allowed to mature and grow and be more applicable or implementable because that industry involvement and that industry input is helping to provide a simulation of what the real world is like outside of the real world, it's really helpful there. What I think happens is that if I'm able to have partnerships like that, where I can have projects that maybe start with a seed planted by industry of, we have a problem we need your help with, I can also take that problem and realize, is this a systemic issue, right? Is this something that the entire pet food community is struggling with? Or is this a localized issue that maybe is best suited for an industry partner to fund? But if it is a systemic issue, then maybe that's where I take this idea of a seed that was planted by an industry partner and I go pursue federal funding for, because perhaps in that space, there's a greater need for funding levels that the federal government might have compared to the industry partner, or it's impactful enough that the entire industry needs opportunity to utilize that solution, right? It's not something that's just owned by a single company. So what I have found most valuable is an ecosystem where both can be successful, and the places where industry partnerships are valued, but also there are guardrails around where that partnership crosses a line and where you have to kind of intervene and not allow inappropriate behaviors or inappropriate relationships to take place. Where I think it's interesting for students, and this goes back to kind of the earlier comments around students engaging with industry and how that helps them to see application of their passion and interest in research they've performed. I think behaviors around managing conflict need to be impressed upon our students as well. I remember when I was a graduate student doing research with industry, I had an industry partner who was reviewing a manuscript for me, and I had found, the data analysis said this outcome, and the industry partner who I'd shared a draft of the manuscript with said, "Are you sure that's what it says?" And I remember the moment, this was, almost 20 years ago. I remember the moment of this revered industry professional was not questioning my analysis of the data, but questioning my interpretation. And because my interpretation was not beneficial to their company, and they were wanting maybe a more beneficial to their company outcome. And it was really important for me in that moment as a graduate student to have a faculty advisor who supported me and who maintained those boundaries and those guardrails and said, our commitment is to performing independent research. We can do that in collaboration with industry, but here's where industry involvement is off limits, is when we're interpreting the results. And so I think that's something that I have really carried with me as a professional now training graduate students, of putting very clear guardrails and boundaries around the role of industry and the role of academia. And those guardrails and boundaries, I think, strengthen the relationship and the ability of research that is informed by industry being valued by society, because I know, and the industry partner knows, that their ability to influence the results is absolutely zero. And then we're a trusted research partner. And if there are companies who don't want that relationship, that's okay. But in my experience, I think most of the time, having those clear boundaries, managing that conflict early on actually helps to increase the impact of research. And that is, I'm really fortunate to have had that experience with many of our industry partners. And the last thing I would say, that I think in the pet food space, particularly because there is such limited federal funding, without industry partnership, in my opinion, many of the acute problems that are impacting in quality and safety, that are impacting the pet food industry in substantial ways, would not, reach the bottom rung of priorities for many of our federal funding agencies. But what many of these small industry projects have done has allowed us to identify systemic issues that then we can invest larger efforts to address. And the Pet Food Alliance, I think, has played a pretty interesting role in doing that, where, and I'll share a specific example. One of the biggest challenges that's faced from the manufacturers of ingredients, the meat industry and the rendering industry, and the manufacturers of the food, is oxidation. And oxidation of the raw materials in pet food manufacturing. And we spent a long time talking about, individual company problems. And that was a significant portion of the first couple of years of the Alliance, of really putting out fires, if you will. But over time, what the Alliance has kind of transitioned to is we've realized that this is a systemic challenge. And in order to address a systemic challenge, we need to have a research strategy. And so we have, rather than putting out a million little tiny fires, there is now a research strategy at the Pet Food Alliance of addressing the challenge of oxidation for ingredients going into pet food manufacturing. And what that means is that members of the Alliance are part of that long-term strategy. And it's somewhat similar to a federal agency that might say, we have a long-term strategy to address X. That's what we have mobilized and adopted as an alliance. But it started with that industry research that identified an acute problem that over time we realized was a systemic challenge. And we were able to elevate those acute problems into a systemic strategy, and now have mobilized impactful research that's really addressing a system-wide issue. And I think that would not have happened if it weren't for industry research that really informed those early conversations.
How fascinating! There's so many things to talk about, and you and I could definitely do this for hours. Maybe could you maybe highlight the number of companies who are currently involved and how companies can get involved if they want to be part of the cumulative solution?
Yeah, great question. So right now we have about 200 to 250 companies. Again, those are companies who are manufacturing pet food. They're supporting pet food manufacturing. They're suppliers of raw ingredients, whether that's muscle-based ingredients, fat-based ingredients, or otherwise. And then the industries that support. So the packaging industries, think of all of those sorts of associated industries. We have throughout, so the Pet Food Alliance has one meeting every year. We call our technical meeting. This year, we're meeting in Canyon, Texas, in collaboration with the American Meat Science Association's Reciprocal Meat Conference. The meeting really focuses on bringing together members of industry, and the sole focus is to articulate research priorities for the next year. And so the companies can get involved by participating in that meeting. So that's one of the easiest ways is come to Canyon, Texas in June and participate in the meeting. We ask people, what is at the top of your inbox? What is keeping you up at night? What do you need research to address? What seeds those conversations is we have 3 working groups, one focused on product quality, one on product safety, and the other on sustainability. And they meet bi-monthly throughout the year. So this is where industry partners throughout the year and academicians are participating in Teams calls or Zoom meetings, and they're hearing like in real time, like we have a problem with X. What are you all feeling? Like, how are you addressing this problem? They're also funding research and getting quarterly updates about the research projects they've funded at those Zoom or Teams meetings that occur every other month. And so I think an easy way is for a person to attend our meeting in June. I'm happy to share the link. If you Google the Pet Food Alliance, you will be taken to our website. All of the registration fees for the meeting, I think this is a really neat thing about the Alliance. Again, the commitment the Alliance has is to mobilizing research. So we are fortunate to have funding for the meeting through our funding sponsor. All of the registration fees fund research. And so every year, if you attend the meeting and you pay a $500 registration fee, you are contributing to the research fund. And then you are actively deciding and participating in this allocating those research dollars to support research projects. If you are a member of academia, registration is free, and we will actually cover travel expenses for members of academia to come to the Pet Food Alliance meeting. And that goes back to the commitment the Alliance has to facilitating student engagement and facilitating academic partnerships. Of the research community, academic research community knows very little about this industry. And one way to incentivize academia to participate and learn more about is make it easy. So as an academician, I want to make sure that my colleagues come to this meeting with open ears and not the burden of how am I going to pay to get there. We'll pay for you to get there. We'll pay for the registration. Come with an open ear and an eye towards solutions, because you're going to hear lots of need for your expertise area from this industry. And it's been really amazing to see academicians from a ton of different fields who may have never thought about their specific skill set or discipline being relevant to the pet food industry, and it is. And then you will find new networks that kind of build with academicians and industry members and new research relationships. So that's probably, as an academic, that's been one of the most fun things to see is, while we are in the business of funding research to address solutions, that networking part of it and engaging new generations of students and new generations of researchers and being a part of this really important field has been really cool to see.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And I think that maybe not this year, but you can expect my application to come to the annual meeting probably next year. I have a lot of travel keyed up for this year.
No problem.
So thank you so much, but I'm not going to let you off the hook quite that easily. And I have 3 questions before the end of the podcast.
Yeah.
It's time for our famous 3.
Your ag business didn't stall on the market. It stalled because everything roots through you. Pricing, hiring, the angry account. You're not leading the company, you're refereeing it. The Owner's Box is a peer group of 8 to 10 agribusiness owners with one agenda: get you out of daily operations and into the owner's seat. Monthly working sessions, real decisions, real commitments. Built by Wisenetics, the #1 podcast network in animal protein. Apply for Cohort 1 at the Owner's Box. Seats close when the room is full.
So first, as a meat science professional, what reference do you rely on the most?
The Code of Federal Regulations is probably where I spend most of my time.
Wow, that was quick, and I'm sorry, I have a feeling that's a really big book.
It is.
Is it? AFCO's pretty big. That's what's on my side table.
I could see that one. It's similar to AFCO. You would put pretty good parallel.
Okay, interesting. This is personal, kind of, but I think that you'll really like it. I'm a little bit infatuated with the fact that we have too many hides, as in HIDES. And I was wondering why, and whether you have any insight onto why we are not using this in some form for pet treats or even pet food, because we have enough information to know that dogs and cats can tolerate animal fiber as hair. So any insights?
Yeah, and it's funny. I think I have at least one conversation a month about hides and how to fix the hide issue in the U.S. I think part of the issue, I think there's a pretty common understanding as to why hides are utilized less frequently in, textiles and spaces like that, and how we have an abundance of hides, and many of the hides in the U.S. are going to the landfill. I think one of the reasons why we haven't seen much of an interest or a latching on to the use of hides in the pet food processing space is logistical challenges associated with it. It's not super easy for our larger packers to repurpose those in a different stream, right? I think there's big things move slow. And so I think like the logistical and operational challenges of how can I redirect hides from a waste stream in some spaces or a product stream that is well ingrained into our infrastructure. How can we repurpose that? That's a harder transition. I've seen a ton of interest, though, in our small and mid-sized packers of how can they use hides, that their disposal of hides is one of their number one expenses. They're actively paying to get rid of them. One of the challenges there is there's not the volume at which a pet food manufacturer would need hides. There's not a way to aggregate hides from these small and mid-sized processors where, if I've got 100 hides at this plant and 50 hides over here, how can I get that to a pet treat maker at a volume that they need and consistently meeting that volume? So I think there's some infrastructure that needs to be developed on the small and mid-sized processors to make it easier for our pet food manufacturers to utilize hides.
It sounds like it could be achieved though. So
Absolutely. There's a ton of interest. Yeah.
Good. Because I personally think that dogs and cats would also love them, and it would also enrich their lives. And so if someone figures that out, I'm going to do research on that as well. And last but not least, it's the loaded pet question: cat or dog?
A dog.
Oh, hardcore dog lover. Okay.
I'm a hardcore dog. Yeah, I grew up with cats primarily, but my husband and I got a dog. He turns 5 in May, and he runs the house. So he's our little dude, and I'm now a dog enthusiast forever.
Amazing. Well, thanks again thank you once again, Jennifer. Really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the chance.
That concludes another episode of the Pet Food Science Podcast, presented by Wisenetics. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review because your feedback is invaluable. Until next time, this is Kate Shudler signing off for the Pet Food Science Podcast.